Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. I missed last week. I hope that went well. I have yet to watch it. But we have a lot of stuff on. It was actually kind of hard to choose the topics. It's kind of busy for a December, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I think we're between the holidays and folks are thinking about other things, but there's jam-packed calendars. So let's dive into the fun.
All right. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the debt ceiling? Of course, we did, avoid a government shutdown last week. Another temporary fix, punting it down to February. I expect we're going to be right back where we were, on Thursday night in February. But related to that, or sort of related to that, is the debt ceiling. And it does look like they're talking. McConnell had been threatening prior, saying you're going to have to do this without us. That's what they've been saying, the whole time. But it does look like they are actually talking things through. Dave?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting scenario that kind of played out this just the last few days. Even there were so basically, just let's talk about concepts. So the debt ceiling is not a limit on spending; it's a limit on the ability of the Department of Treasury to borrow money to pay debt in effect, because our government borrows about 40 cents of every dollar that it spends. So they allocate spending, they say they're going to spend it, then activities occur, and about half of all activities are debt. So in order to keep repaying that debt, we need a debt ceiling. So what they typically do is they do continuing resolutions to keep the government flowing on a temporary basis. Back in October, there was a continuing resolution to keep the government open until December 3rd. And then basically Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary Yellen, said that she thought she could extend it to the 15th. So that's the sort of tentative mile marker in the line in the sand, so to speak. So where are we now? Well, McConnell, like you said, the minority leader in the Senate, he's not willing to have any of his members vote actually for an increase, but he knows that 40 cents of every dollar is borrowed and that they have to increase it. It's like gravity. They have to increase it in order to continue to operate. So the question is, can they politically put the blame onto Democrats so that they can run in 2022 saying, look what they did with all this debt. They're terrible. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, he's been working with Senator Schumer, who's the majority leader, for a sort of a fast track path, a shortcut, so to give the Democrats the ability to take the ownership of this debt ceiling and pass it without any Republican votes.
That's pretty much it. I mean, again, what they're promising to do is not filibuster, is what McConnell's doing, is coming up with a way not to filibuster. And again, as we've talked about, we're at this goofy phase in the history of politics where not filibustering is considered to be almost a vote in favor, right? It's just become so insane that way. And so I guess McConnell is kind of, providing an out for the Democrats to basically fall on the sword and save the country, so that McConnell can use it later on. I don't know. I mean, it's all in headlines, and I think McConnell and the Republicans are sort of hoping that people will forget that it was in the headlines, or that Democrats won't be able to explain things right. And a lot of times Democrats don't message things right. I mean, you see it every day. I mean, Biden's blowing a chance right now, right? He went to the trouble. I'm just going to go off topic a second. He takes all the trouble to pull oil out of the reserves, right? Everybody objects to it, even some Democrats. They say it's not going to do any good. He does it in coordination with these other countries, and now the price is dropping of gas. Well, it probably has nothing to do with that, but that wouldn't stop Trump from saying, see, I did that, and the price of gas is going down. You don't see that messaging anywhere. Republicans would do it shamelessly. They would say, they look to the correlation and call it causation. Nobody is, but the Democrats just don't think that way. He should be trumpeting it right now. The price of gas is actually on the way down as we're speaking, and will probably continue to drop for quite some time. And nobody's out there delivering that message. Why? They're just, but Republicans will hammer on this, and they want to be able to say, see, they voted for that. The debt is high. That's going to be their issue for 2022. And that's so McConnell wants to be able to do. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. Democrats will counter, but they end up countering with like 5 paragraphs to every millibyte of McConnell. We'll see.
I think one of the interesting elements here is sort of people always say it's a cliche, but you don't want to know how the sausage gets made. Like, you don't want to know what happens in the back rooms. But I think that one of this really interesting elements of this was that both party leaders wanted this to happen, but they want to, one wants to save face, one wants to allow the other to save face, so to speak, to their constituents, to their vulnerable members who right. are facing re-election, etc. And so one of the things that I think Schumer sort of, one rumor said it came from McConnell, one rumor said it came from Schumer. Who knows which is true? But they talked about putting it in the defense spending bill. So yeah. Everybody votes for the defense spending bill because nobody, there's military spending in every district of every state. So no one's going to vote against, I say no one, like almost no one is going to vote against any defense spending bill. So they were just going to put it in there to give everybody credit. But some of the Republicans said, look, I'm going to vote against it no matter where you put it. Don't make me vote against the defense spending bill. Put it in the Medicaid reconciliation bill instead. So that's what they're doing because of the COVID stimulus. I forgot, I forgot the name of the bill, to be honest, but that $1.9 trillion bill that came out at the beginning of the year. Because of that, Medicare is short by some number, maybe close to $15 billion of money that it could have had because it was sort of repurposed. So they got to at least put that back in imminently, or else many doctors or hospitals are not going to get paid. So this Medicare bill has to happen. So they said, well, let's just put it in there. A lot of people don't mind voting against it. Enough people are going to vote for it, give the Republicans some cover. So I think that was sort of a tit for tat of how they were going to deal with this. And the other piece of this real quickly is the dollar amounts involved. So $2.5 trillion is, I think, Janet Yellen's team's most recent estimate. That's the amount they're going to raise the debt ceiling just to get through the midterm election. So basically for one more year, the additional borrowing that has to happen above and beyond our current, whatever it is, $28 trillion limit. I forgot the exact number. But now they're saying we're going to borrow that much more just to get through the next 12 months. So these huge numbers that we've been hearing with these different bills, it makes your eyes roll back. But that's kind of where we're at. The Republicans are going to make a way. They're going to do a one-time vote that says, hey, McConnell's got at least 10 allies that are going to vote for this procedural vote to allow a majority-only vote, 51 votes, and then that way they can make sure that this Medicare supplemental bill, whatever it's called, is the pathway for this all to happen. They raise the debt ceiling, everybody gets what they want.
Now, Dave, maybe you can tell me this. Are we at least finally on to Biden's presidency of covering the debt, or are we still on Trump's his spending? I mean, I know that the last time around we were talking about, we weren't even covering future stuff or even stuff that Biden was responsible for, but just to cover stuff that of the prior fiscal year. Are we finally, talking about Biden's alleged debt at this point? Yeah,
because as we know, we have to buy, basically we have to borrow money every week. A lot of it. If we have to raise the debt ceiling by 2.5 trillion to get through 50 weeks, that's 50 trillion a week or whatever we know. So sorry, it's a huge number. 2.5 trillion be 250 billion. So sorry, 50 billion a week. And so that is a ton of money that they're borrowing, virtually $10 billion a day. So the cumulative debt brings us up to the ceiling as of just a few weeks from now. I think Yellen said it would get through, just 2 weeks from now. But yeah, it's real time new debt on top of all the old debt.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that this has ever been a real effective campaign issue anyway. It galvanizes some of the fiscal conservative Republicans, but I don't know that it's really has been anything that has won or lost an election at any point, because it's not, the debt doesn't really affect people on a day-to-day level. That's we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the show, about issues that affect people on a day-to-day level. Inflation does, right? But debt, it's kind of abstract to some people. So, but it's something that Republicans get to hit Democrats on, even though the debt goes up, most often in Republican administrations, ironically.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, we have a lot to talk about with January 6th and what is happening there. I mean, there's so much going on, and there's we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We know there are a lot of statements and depositions being taken. We've got hints of it. I know that people are getting nervous who are not in the depositions, but they are getting a lot of information. They seem to be plugging along, and Bannon, of course, is obviously not participating. Meadows was cooperating until last week. We also reported that Meadows is, called his own book fake news. Once Trump complained about it, he seems to be completely back in Trump's trying to get back in Trump's good graces now, and he's announced he's not going to show up to Tuesday's deposition. But Bannon wants to counterattack, and we got a lot else going on. Eastman, meanwhile, is invoking the Fifth Amendment. I haven't seen that since when a lot of the communists and fellow travelers were claiming that in order to avoid contempt against McCarthy in the 1950s. I think that's what they're trying to what he's trying to do. But of course, Eastman is in a lot has come out about him recently. I mean, we've got so much to talk about this. Where do you want to start, Dave?
I think it's good to start with John Eastman, in part because he was standing there next to Trump on the stage. He was one of the speakers on January 6th. He's a former, law professor and Federalist Society member. So he's a reputable figure in conservative jurisprudence, arguably. Some would say. And his legal team is basically just saying, look, the situation we find ourselves in is that the Congress is conducting themselves in secret, these meetings, and they're throwing around criminal charges. And with that climate in mind, it's just not. We can't go ahead in good faith and answer any of these things. And I would argue that that's not very principled approach here, but that's what they're doing. They're basically saying, look, if we say anything, we can get in a lot of trouble.
But see, and that's the point here. We're talking. Eastman is the guy who came up with the architect of a 6-step plan for Pence to basically overturn the election. And there are actually Republican attorneys now saying, we probably need to tighten up, telling Republicans we probably need to get together with the Democrats and tighten up that law, because Harris might do that in 2024 if she sees Trump as an existential threat to democracy. We've got this hole we need to fill, that basically we need to take the discretion away. We need to basically just say that all the vice president does is report. But I don't know if that fits in with what the Constitution says, with what the wording is. But Eastman had basically said, hey, the vice president has that power, do it. Pence, of course, went to former Vice President Dan Quayle, who said, you better not do that. And didn't do it. And because he didn't do that, Pence is on the outs as a rhino with all of the throngs. Well, now Eastman's in the hot seat because a lot has come out about what he did. He's not going to say anything, but they're part of what's being discussed in this back rooms of transcripts is his memo and people who talk to him.
And so I'd like to pivot to Bannon, if it's okay. And Eastman actually went on Bannon's show and said, like, look, this whole thing is a farce. Send me money for my legal team because we're going to need it because it's an existential threat to the whole country, yada yada. So that's their PR campaign. That's their media messaging that they're trying to get out to fight the process. And so that's my segue to Bannon fighting the process. Bannon's legal team has a very different approach. What they've decided to do was kind of flip the script and put the committee in the crosshairs as ripe and eligible for discovery. So basically what Bannon's saying is, look, everything that was said by everyone in Congress and all their staffers and everybody planning this committee, we need it all. We want discovery. We want to know the conspiracy to undermine President Trump, basically. So they're flipping the script, and they're going to put this full court press on, and they're basically saying, hey, we're going to need a lot of time. The committee's lawyers are saying, we're not going to need a lot of time, Steve Bannon. We've got one question for you, or one small set of topics. We just need a few hours of your time, and you go ahead and come in. We'll ask you a couple questions. You'll be gone. And Bannon's like, no, you asked for tons of stuff. You asked for all the material, communications, and Eastman's actually saying this too. His team is saying this too. So much was requested. It's going to take us in a criminal proceeding. We would have like a year to pull all this stuff together. So we want a hearing way out in the future, and they're looking to move the timeline. They're fighting the timeline, like you said, with the hopes that they could just undermine the whole committee come midterm elections 2022 time results.
They want to run out the clock and then hope that the Republicans come to power and dissolve the committee. What they're not really considering is that the Department of Justice doesn't have to drop, even if the committee no longer exists. The Department of Justice doesn't have to drop those contempt charges. They don't have to do that. They can say, hey, this was a bad. That would set a bad precedent, and they say you still need to produce those documents, even if they're going to a non-existent committee. They would still say you need to do that, and you need to, and by the way, here are the consequences for not doing that. And the courts may go along with it. So they're not thinking that. They're thinking, oh, that'll become politically untenable. Why? Why will it be politically untenable? So. I'm sure Congress will get in there and try to undo it, but it's in the executive branch's hands at that point. They can't interfere with that, even if they are no longer requesting those documents. So it's a myopic strategy, according to a lot of attorneys. It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, and if they don't retake the House, they're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and I think I just want to kind of underline, put a fine point on it, that there is a media campaign strategy since Election Day, really, to say, the election was fraudulent. January 6th was some peaceful protesters, et cetera. So there's a whole parallel narrative, let's just call it, that a lot of these folks, Trump supporters and his allies and all the folks we're talking about, his chief of staff and his lawyers, et cetera. We're going to talk about the military component of this in our next session. But just sticking to the political side, Eastman went on the Mark Levin show. Like I said, he went on Bannon's show. He called National Pulse. He also went on the Mark Levin show and said similar things. Well, it turns out that former President Trump was also on the Mark Levin show in the last few days, where he said, look, I fired the head of the CIA because otherwise he was going to, come for me. And I fired him so that he doesn't come for me, which is you can't say obstruction of justice fast enough. He basically implicated himself on national television, saying the silent thing out loud. And people are like, wait, what was that? Lawrence Tribe, famous constitutional lawyer Lawrence Tribe just said, hey, Merrick Garland, here's the link to the show. What are you going to do next? I forget the exact wording, but It was like, are you going to do anything about this? So the reason I mention this is because the institution of the presidency, the institution of the Justice Department, and we're going to talk soon, the institution of the Army. I mean, there are there's a lot of questions about we can defend the institution while also being critical of members and individual people, because ultimately individual people make decisions, and there are consequences of decisions. And in this instance, just getting to your point, I wonder the Justice Department is in this interesting position where they have to sort of defend their own reputation, but at the same time because they have 4 years of the Trump's presidency where they were operating, but there were some there are some egregious threats to the democratic order that are now sort of being exposed and challenged openly.
All right, we'll be back on that, but I'll just really quickly say the Republicans will know they need to sweat when there was the first call for a public hearing, a public question and answer, because they don't do that until they know the answers to all the questions they're going to ask somebody. And that means that they've gotten what they need. And that Ben and Eastman Meadows, they won't show up to that at all unless they're dragged in, and they may very well be dragged in. Staying on the January 6th committee, part 2, a formal memo from D.C. National Guard leadership. Colonel Matthews, on behalf of General Walker, accuses Army staff leadership of overt lying and Stalinist revisionism. And we're talking about Flynn's brother as part of this, right? It all comes right back to that there was interference here, or deliberate decision to not get involved with what was happening. Dave?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this gives me goosebumps to talk about, because it's one of those things, whether it's Christmas or Thanksgiving, you're talking to your family, nobody wants to have these conversations. So I'm just going to preface this by saying it's a difficult thing to talk about when you're challenging the most senior leadership of our U.S. Army. In fact, General Flynn's brother, General Flynn, General Charles Flynn, he's currently the head of the Army Pacific. So if we had a ground war anywhere in the Pacific, or any Army asset was called in, he'd be the highest-ranking staff officer in the U.S. military. So it's for that region. So this is heavy stuff. For his part, Colonel Matthews, he's the attorney representing General Walker of the D.C. National Guard. His quote, which I think is telling, he said, "Our Army has never failed us and did not do so on January 6, 2021. However, occasionally some of our Army leaders have failed us, and they did so on January 6th. Then they lied about it and tried to cover it up. They tried to smear a good man and to erase history." And so what he meant by that was there's a gap in time, depending on how you look at the timeline. Approximately 2:30 on January 6th, there was a call, and then the historic record from the Army says there was another call at 4:30. But the U.S. National Guard, the D.C. National Guard says that 4:30 call never happened. And basically, Trump's acting Secretary of the Army in that interim period supposedly met with staff leadership at U.S. Army and decided that they had a plan, and then they gave approval for the plan. That's the historic record. And in theory, that's what they're going to teach in the history books unless something changes. But what Colonel Matthews, on behalf of General Walker, and to his credit, General Walker says, "Look, Colonel Matthews' memo speaks for itself." His memo was given to the January 6th committee, and it calls two Army generals who are staff leaders, General Charles Flynn. He was Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations on January 6th, and Lieutenant General Walter Platt, who's Director of Army Staff. So these are two highest level people. He called them, quote, "absolute and unmitigated liars" for their characterization of the events of that day. So we can get into the nitty gritty. I'll take another crack at this. Just what is that issue? Real quick, what is the issue is when there is an insurrection at the Capitol, the National Guard is trained, has a program, has worked with the district, has worked with the district police. They have a plan. They know what to do. But they were basically kept in barracks pending approval from above. And the time that lapsed is what's in question. And so if it was the case that awful things happened, that time would have been the difference. And so this January 6th committee that is reflecting on that lapse before deployment, that's really what we're talking about here.
Well, and it sounds like we probably it probably needs to be brought beyond the January 6th committee. It probably should go to the Armed Services Committee, probably to a Senate committee, and probably a formal grievance should be filed within the armed services themselves. I mean, this sounds like, I don't know if it rises to the level of treason, but certainly some level of discipline should be there, especially if they're falsifying records. There should be at least an investigation happening on that. I don't know what Matthews and Walker, what their plans are on that, but January 6th is a very specific investigation. I would think it needs to be much broader than that, because this is in some ways a much bigger deal.
And so this is interesting. I wanted to give the Army staff fair hearing here. You said they're falsifying records, and it's it's semantics, but they are the record. So they didn't falsify the record. They created the record. They are the record.
Right.
So their position is that the actions of January 6th have been well documented and reported on, and General Flynn and Lieutenant General Piat have been open, honest, and thorough in their sworn testimony with Congress and the Department of Defense investigators. The Inspector General has a very similar statement. I don't have an exact quote from the Inspector General, but they're basically like, our report speaks for itself. We were thorough, we were fair, we were accurate. So there is the mechanisms of the institutions of the Army and its oversight bodies have basically said, We've told you what history is. It's a these aren't the droids you're looking for moment.
But what does Walker base this on then?
Because the call that occurred at 2:30, Walker and Matthews is the one who wrote the memo.
Right.
So those two, the colonel and the general, were on the call, and their position was, we're trained for this. We're going. Like, we should go. And that call did not result in action. The acting Secretary of the Army, I think it's Ms. McCarthy, he was not answering calls. He was incommunicado for a while. So they intentionally were not given permission to do what they were trained to do with the protocols and procedures that they thought they ought to follow. The Army just said, chill, and then the Army said, okay, at 4:30 we did this call. It's officially the position of the country right now that call happened. This is the part that you were alluding to. We can investigate this piece because both Colonel Matthews and General Walker, their position is there was no call. We were not on that call.
Right. So somebody is lying. One of them is lying, and whoever is lying should not be in their position. So that's it needs to come down to that. So at this point, the House Armed Services Committee and whatever the Senate equivalent is need to investigate to determine whether it's Walker or Flynn and or company are lying. Which one of them? Both of them aren't telling the truth. That needs to happen no matter what. And that's it really comes down to that. And I'm not hearing a whole lot of discussion about that.
Walker's now the sergeant at arms of the in Congress. I don't know which chamber, but he's sort of been elevated to an important role within the Capitol because of the trust that the Capitol members have for him. So to a certain extent, Congress is on this side. Probably
their
the House.
lives. Yeah, they are trusting him with their lives. If he's lying about this, that's a serious matter. So, again, one of them is lying about that phone call. There have to be records of it if it happened. And this is a big deal. And it's bigger than January 6th committee. I mean, this is a bigger deal than that. Okay, they're not falsifying records technically because they are the record. Okay, they're falsifying history. I mean, that's a big deal. And that, I guess that's what he means by Stalinist revisionism. I mean, is just that anyway, it's a big accusation, and the Inspector General can say what he wants, but we need to know. This is something that needs to be known, and I'll be very interested to see what happens with it. But the January 6th committee shouldn't even be dealing with this. It should be referred to a committee that is empowered to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you that it's a huge issue that you don't hear about, because apparently it's too raw, it's too important to a lot of people, but just one of the small things that I think was considered, Matthew says, is a factual inaccuracy that someone on the call, they can't attribute it, they don't know if it's Flynn or Piat, these Army staff generals. One of them, according to Matthews, said that the appearance of sending the National Guard to the Capitol to defend the Capitol from American citizens it was something that needed approval, needed to be considered. And Williams I keep calling him Williams. Matthews and Walker have basically said that's what was said, but the Army they're saying that never happened, that they would never say that, and that they didn't say that. So to be continued. I just think this is such a big thing that I thought it was really important that we kind of flesh it out and give it the gravity that it deserves.
Absolutely, I didn't quite realize the degree to what this was. All right, well, that takes us to our next topic.
I think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
We are going back to Georgia. Georgia, of course, was the focal point earlier this year when it flipped the Senate to the Democrats after it looked like the Republicans were going to be holding the Senate. They caught a big break in North Carolina when the Democratic candidate who had been winning couldn't keep his pecker in his pocket, got broken up on an affair controversy. And a couple of other races didn't go very well for the Democrats. So it was looking like that in Georgia. Everybody was saying, well, it's starting to go blue, but is it ready to do that, especially in a special election where Democrats don't tend to not turn out very well? Well, Trump came to the rescue of the Democrats and started, because he just could not let go of the big lie and was pushing it and making phone calls that came out during the weekend, threatening and trying to intimidate the leadership and the elections people, and it backfired. And Warnock and Ossoff won their positions. Well, Warnock is up for re-election because he won in the special election. He is possibly going to face football great Herschel Walker, but Herschel Walker has a bunch of baggage, and we'll probably be talking about that. Assuming he runs, he hasn't even officially run yet, but he is Trump's choice to run. But there are a lot of issues with him, and he's untried. Right now, he's doing pretty well in the polls, but that's because he's a popular hero. He is, of course, African American, and a very interesting thing to happen since for running for governor, Stacey Abrams, if Vernon Jones, one of the 5 or 6 Republican candidates, if Vernon Jones managed to win the nomination, we would have all 4 candidates for governor and Senate would be African American. That would be unprecedented in Georgia politics. Be very interesting. But Vernon Jones, a lot of people have been speculating that ex-President Trump was going to endorse him. but he didn't. There were some others that were possibilities. There was another somewhat lesser known woman, Candace Taylor. It's a little bit out there. Her. You go to her website, and the slogan is "God, Guns, and Babies," and morality over money, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And she's got a big photo of her with Trump on it, almost implying that Trump is endorsing her. But he endorsed Perdue, who is the candidate that was defeated, I believe. I'm trying to remember which was which. I'm not sure if he lost to Warnock. I get mixed up with Ossoff, but he was one of the candidates, the incumbent, who lost for a number of reasons. He got caught in possibly sort of an insider trading thing involving his position in the Senate. That's going to come back to haunt him. But he is running for governor because, of course, Kemp, who is the current governor, who Stacey Abrams accused of manipulating the election the last time around to benefit him. He refused to give up his Secretary of State position for the election. But apparently, because he didn't adopt the big lie and help Trump come up with elections, Trump is getting even with him by endorsing Perdue. Perdue, of course, but the problem with that is a lot of Trump supporters see Perdue as a rhino, including Bannon today, who came out and basically said he's not a strong enough endorser of the big lie. And so it's and Lynn Wood is saying he should have endorsed Candace. It's really, and Vernon Jordan has been kind of silent. People had expected him. I've been informed that Perdue lost to Ossoff, so it's which was the least expected of the two. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, and meanwhile, Stacey Abrams is not facing any opposition. You've got 5 candidates, a lesser known named Catherine Davis, also a Republican, very conservative, but Kemp immediately attacked Perdue. When he was in there. It doesn't look like he's going to be dropping out of the race just because Trump is doing that. Besides, it looks like the Trump voters are going to be split up among different people. Bannon and other Trump people are upset. A lot of Trump supporters, former Trump supporters, are saying he's sold out. He's backing a rhino. Which is Republican in name only, and you've got Vernon, Take Back Georgia. He's a former Democrat, really big on guns. So you've got these really interesting personalities. I mean, the debates, if they are all still in this, are going to be fascinating. All to the potential benefit of Stacey Abrams, who is, we know one thing, she's going to get out the vote. That's what she does. And that will probably benefit Warnock, even if he is up against a popular football player who maybe doesn't fill up. Republicans have to be a little frustrated with Trump here, but they can't really say a whole lot. Because if the Trump voters stay out of it in the fall, whoever wins, then Warnock and Stacey Abrams are going to win those 2 positions, and that will be huge.
I'm going to take your cue and work backwards. So if this is ground zero for Trump's, let's call it meddling, but really the word, a non-pejorative word is engagement. He's all hands on deck engaging in this, and so Governor Kemp, like you said, he's considered that he, from a Trump perspective, he undermined the ability to take control of the electoral outcome there. So as a payback, that's sort of how Trump team works. Former U.S. Senator David Perdue is going to challenge, and what he said in that little press release that they distributed was that he feared that Kemp cannot beat Stacey Abrams again. Mm-hmm. So immediately Kemp's reply was like, "Look, I fight on behalf of Georgia, the citizens of Georgia, against the progressives." So even though that's Kemp's position, is that like he's really solidly against progressives, and he benefited actually from having some crossover votes, moderate middle of the road suburban voters who were more inclined to vote for him because of that positioning. He's positioned himself there. But so what are Purdue's prospects? Like what's the takeaway here? What's really important? Well, one thing, Kemp does have the support of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, which is no small feat. That's a pretty big one. But what does Purdue have? Like what is it? Kenny or is just having Trump behind him enough? And I would say that he's infamous. You said because of that insider trading thing. It's really from the perspective of being critical of him for his choices. His volume of stock trading during the pandemic. He was more interested in, his bottom line, his own personal making money, many trades. It was the volume that was very offensive. Plus the committees that he was a member of, he would trade on that insider information, which, that's the insider piece that you alluded to. So the perception of corruption, it rises to the level of people consider it outrageous. And just to show how unsympathetic of a figure he is, he's also the former CEO of Dollar General, which there's all sorts of anti-labor decisions and practices that people have accused them of. So I think this is going to be a tough competition. Trump's support of Purdue will definitely play an outsized role. I think there's no question, meaning that Kemp really does have a tough road ahead. And according, just my final takeaway is I think it's going to be one of the bigger races in the country this year.
And the problem is most likely Stacey Abrams can beat any of those three, Vernon, Purdue at this point, and certainly the other one. She might have a hard time against Kemp, but they are going to be hammering. Those other three are going to be hammering on Kemp the whole time as being a rhino, which means that Trump people are not going to vote for him in the fall. That's a problem. I mean, I'm not going to say this guarantees a win for Stacey Abrams. A lot can happen between now and next year, but it's looking real good for her. And for Warnock for that reason. All right, well, stay tuned because that's going to get interesting. Our last topic for tonight, a lot of discussion about the court discussions. It looks like several justices look like they're ready to overturn Roe v. Wade in the Mississippi case. This is even more serious than the Texas case. I mean, instantaneously, if they do that, there are something like 16 or 17 states cocked ready to go. It will abortion will be outlawed in those states automatically, which means that there'll be more people coming to the other states, more women coming to places like California, Nevada, and other states to have abortions. It's going to be really interesting, and really sad for a lot of women if this happens. But it's looking like this is what's going to happen. Clarence Thomas was even talking about, he doesn't speak up very much, but he was talking, they're talking Plessy versus Ferguson being overturned by Brown v. Board of Education. They were talking, about how precedent doesn't really mean all that much when you're talking about basic human rights, about how the technology is showing us that there's personhood earlier, maybe even earlier than 6 weeks, that, will they even go further than just overturning Roe v. Wade and declare that that a fetus is a human being at a certain point in age? I don't think so, because that's not the issue up here this time around, but possibly another time. But at any rate, it's looking like that's going to happen. And the question is will it be a turnout issue for Democrats, and will it bring in moderates? Will it pull moderates towards Democratic candidates in the election next year? Some of the conventional wisdom is, well, abortion doesn't pull Democrats. It motivates Republicans, but it doesn't motivate Republicans and centrists. But usually what I've always heard from centrists and moderates and even left-wing Democrats is, well, it's not going to happen. They don't feel like it's actually going to happen. They'll never really do that. Well, now it looks like it's really going to happen. Maybe it won't. but it looks like it's really on the wall that next June Roe v. Wade will be overturned. So the question is will that be a motivating factor for Democrats in 2022, or that women have actually lost choice in 16 or 17 states or more? Dave.
So Eric, I mean, this is another grave topic. I got goosebumps again. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age or something. But these are two hugely important topics for our country's history. And you did a really good job of kind of spelling out what happened in oral arguments. There were people who do this sort of thing, the legal scholars, the Supreme Court academic folks who study this and look at the language. One of them was interviewed recently for Vice, and that expert said that there's a 1,000,000% chance that this is a done deal. So it's a 6-3 majority. Roberts is going to be the person who tries to the Chief Justice Roberts will be the one who tries to thread the needle and get the most balanced possible way for the American people to swallow this bitter pill. I think Justice Kavanaugh kind of pointed out to like showed their hand almost by saying he went through a list of precedents that were overturned by the court before, just to show this is not a political decision. And for folks, I know you mentioned it, but I'm just going to mention it again. Dred Scott in 1857 was a decision the Supreme Court made that said former slaves and their descendants are not U.S. citizens. That was the law of the land after that day, after that ruling. And Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, segregation was not an equal protection violation under the law. That put separate but equal in play all the way to 1950s. Half a century of Americans lived under that ruling. So this is Kavanaugh saying, look, Roe v. Wade from when I will forget the years of 71 or something like that. I don't know if you remember, Eric, but yeah. So
1972.
Sorry. So it's about 50 years on the button, right? I mean, that's where we are. So it's half a century of what people are used to. So rather than get super into the weeds on the actual arguments that they're going to hear and what they're going to find, the bottom line is, from the perspective, I think, of these conservative justices who were put there for this very reason. Trump even said so when he was running for office. I put these 3 in there, for this purpose. The question is, what's going to be the outcome, right? Like, what's the political outcome when this goes back to the states? You mentioned that there was a set of states that are ready, a dozen or 17, I think you said, that are going to like automatically change.
They've had it cocked and ready to go for years.
Yeah. So, but then the question is, well, what about birth control? So then there's the Casey versus Planned Parenthood case, which could also fall just as easily, depending on how they write the notes and things. They could put a roadmap in place to get rid of birth control in those states too, because it murders babies, according to this definition that they're possibly going to engineer.
Certainly, the morning after pill.
Yes, exactly. Which if you go to Planned Parenthood, I mean, you get it. I mean, if you have a situation, I mean, I've heard people say it, that's, you don't wait 4 or 5 months, 6 months or whatever, 5 weeks, 6 weeks to see what, you just go get that. Right. And then, so that's in jeopardy is what I'm saying. And so this is, even though Roe v. Wade and birth control and abortions are part of the fabric of our society, 2 out of 3 Americans think that it should remain legal. So the court is not representing the majority of the country. Certainly, it's representing a small subset of the population. So when Republicans get the Republican leaning, conservative leaning folks who this is a first principle for them. It's a very hot button topic. If they get what they've been hoping to get, what they've promised to get out of this court, then what? Does that mean in 2022 that they show up and say, yes, our team needs our continued support, or are they going to be complacent and say, well, we got what we need? The flip side of that is, well, what are the Democrats going to do? They already had what they need for the last 40, 50 years. They've had the law on their side, so they've been less, jazzed about it as a general rule. Jazzed is, so I don't mean to be trite here, but once this decision comes out, the landscape will change immensely. I don't think commentators have really adequately, envisioned how maddening this will be to the majority of the country.
Yes,
and I think it will light a fire, rhetorical fire, that will result in massive action and motivation and inspiration that could actually hurt Republican chances to sweep some of the more moderate and those districts where they're we call them purple districts, where it's actually who knows who's going to win.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats are going to bring out the stories. They're going to humanize this if they're smart. Maybe a committee will take it up and bring people to testify to bring this out again. It's like, and they have to do it, and they have to do it over and over and over again. And a lot of women who've been fighting this for years, who are in their 80s, saying, "Why do we have to keep fighting this fight?" And they're going to be, in tears saying this, and maybe it'll resonate with enough voters who will, particularly who are on the line, who are in the middle, to say, yes, this is important. Because what's going to happen if this is overturned is there's going to have to be a right to privacy amendment. That's the only way to do it. People are saying, well, maybe Congress can pass something if they have the majority. That won't stand, because this ruling basically states that states have the rights. It's an overreach of the federal government if that's what they pass. It's going to have to be a constitutional amendment, and they're going to have to pass something like California is the right to privacy. It also has implications beyond abortion rights, because basically what Thomas is saying, he's saying, I see the First Amendment, I see the Second Amendment, I don't see anything about abortion rights. He's basically discounting the Ninth Amendment entirely. And the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, Dred Scott was not overturned by decision. It was overturned by the passage of the 13th and 14th Amendment. Kavanaugh is an idiot. Sorry. I mean, that just has, but that aside, the maybe been drinking or something. I'm sorry, I'm just losing it on this one. Anyway, I really do think this will be a galvanizing part.
We'll follow closely. We
will follow this closely, and we'll see how the Democrats organize around it. But that we have to go on to predictions. Okay, we are at the point of our show for predictions. Dave, what have you got?
Well, last week I said I thought that there would be an extension keeping the government open, that the debt ceiling would be lifted, and that the stimulus bill would be passed. And I just sort of said probably by the end of the year. And I do think that the first two are going to happen, but this Build Back Better budget reconciliation bill, I'm going to rescind my suggestion that it'll happen, because I'm already starting to hear people say, well, we have until June. The budget reconciliation bill doesn't actually have to pass until June in order for all the mechanisms to kick in. And when they are moving the bar like that, that's what the people who support it and think it's going to pass are starting to say. It's not going to pass before Christmas, I don't think, unfortunately.
I'm going to contradict you on that real quickly, because if it doesn't pass by January 15th and the child tax credit gets canceled, they're going to have to pass it before the 15th, or they lose that. And if they lose that, that's going to cost them in Congress. So they're going to have to pass something like that before the 15th.
So hopefully that happens. Yeah, like you can inform my prediction, which I will have corollary to, which is with it not before the new year, but soon thereafter.
All right, I'm going to be real quick. Devin Nunes is leaving Congress at the end of the year, at the end of the month, in order to be the CEO for Trump's new platform, social media platform. He's making it sound like this is an upgrade, but really what's happening is, as we discussed with the map of the redistricting map, his district he is not going to be able to win re-election there. He can't move over to McCarthy's district and run, or Valadeo's district and run. They'd clobber him. He's lost way too much credibility suing fictitious cows and the rest. I believe that district is going to go blue, Democratic. I also believe Valadeo is going to lose. And again, I'm renewing my prediction that the Democrats are going to retake 4, possibly 5 House seats next year again because of the get out the vote possibilities and the model that was developed during this recall. The Republicans are going to regret having done this recall because it was a practice. It was a rehearsal for what's coming. And they didn't quite master it for the 2020 election, but they've got it down now. They can get people out. They can get those phone calls there. And Nunes has seen the writing on the wall. We may see another couple more Republican resignations before then. Probably not Valadea's, but a couple of others. Anyway, that's it for this week. We'll probably be back next week. This is supposed to be Christmas time, but people are still being very political here. But we will be back next week. Until then, keep thinking.